Hi, I'm Brendan Hallian. I'm here again with Michael. Michael, we've been talking about speaking architecture and the language of architecture and the language of exploring. And one of your great personal projects is the connection between travel by motorcycle and your quest to document the great Greek amphitheaters. So, in the classic journalistic way, why this, why now, and why you?
Well, hello, Brandon.
Hey, Michael.
Let's just why this, because it's an awful lot to talk about. Well, first of all, you have to find them. You have to get to them. And first of all, motorcycling is a magnificent way to experience the world and see it and feel it. So when I did my research for my various jaunts, which you can do very easily these days, you realize that a lot of these are in remote locations, and so to plan a route out and to try and be economical with your time and sort of glean as much as possible, a motorcycle is perfect. It's just you fly, you arrive, you get your bike, and boom, you go, and you have everything that you need, and you can explore and you can find them.
Right.
So it's breathtaking. You know, the roads are great, and it's just a wonderful way to get around, and you get to go as many times as you want. You know, when I've gone to some of the more populated ones by tourists, I will arrive, and, you know, in the time that I'm measuring and drawing and taking it all in, there'll be 3 or 4 bus tours that will come. They all clamor out, you know, do their 20 minutes, jump back in the bus, and off they go. So, you know, you're either renting a car, you're hitchhiking, or you're using a motorcycle. Well, with a motorcycle, I can cover a lot of territory. I can go back later on at night, climb the fence, whatever. You know, it's just a perfect vehicle. And the spring and the fall are gorgeous in, you know, well, Italy and Sicily, Turkey, Greece.
And you like doing this alone. Of course, the motorcycle is
Well,
perfect for a solitary quest.
Yeah, and it's a pretty intentional trip. So it's not like you want to stop and say, "Hey, what would you like to do today, honey?" It's, you know, you're
Right, you're on it.
yeah, it's a 24/7 adventure. So that's why this. Why now? Well, it's not been now. It's been a lot of my life. I've really been interested in theater design even before school. You know, I got to attend the Odd Opera House when I was a little boy with my mom. And, you know, I did mention I've worked at the Festival Theaters and Avant Theater and so on, and then did a stint for Michigan Opera Theater doing a development plan for the Detroit Opera, and have entered international competitions to do theatrical design, never winning one. So I just thought I'd start at first principles, I guess about 15 years ago, and start studying, you know, where it all began. And in doing so, found some interesting information, let's say. So it's just a passion that's hard to describe. It's just very exciting. Let me turn this off.
These are structures that are thousands of years old, that are symbolic of all sorts of things, and at the same time, deeply utilitarian, right?
Yeah.
Why don't we talk a little? I mean, this is something that's obviously near and dear to your heart. Why don't we talk a little about the purpose and design of these spaces, and why you chose to explore them the way you did, both as an architect and, let's face it, in a kind of way as a detective, right? Because there's a detective story to this as well.
Yeah, well, what did you describe it as? Speculative history
There you go.
As a category.
Right.
Well, they're democratic wonders of the world. I mean, these would have been places that might have been shelters from the wind. They would have been natural gathering places. I'm talking about the Greek theaters, the original ones, not the Roman ones per se.
Right.
So they would have been geographically, you know, at a crossroads or at a natural place where, you know, people would gather. They could have been microclimates, so that they're sheltered from wind, or, you know, just a beautiful place to visit, and they could be a defensive place in where they're sited on a hill or acropolis. there's also mystical or the oracle type reasons as to why these sites would have been chosen as the place to spend the effort.
Right.
So there's a whole series of reasons that how they evolved as the place to be could have taken thousands of years.
Right.
And in the last and then say 300 BC, they said, well, we're improving it, and we're going to start building. And they were often rebuilt after things that happened in history, including natural disasters or wars and various populations growing. If the city was thriving, then there'd be another layer. They'd just get bigger.
A couple of things. In past conversations, you've mentioned the scale of the audience that some of these amphitheaters could contain, and they're breathtaking. They're far bigger than we could as lay people anyway imagine from just the photographs.
Oh, for sure, and they vary from extremely intimate. And when I say intimate, that's still, there's a couple that are carved and they're very tiny. They're 300 people. Most are 3,000 to 4,000 people, and that's very intimate. And then you go up to 15,000 people, 12 to 15,000 people, and they still feel intimate because of the geometry. And our festival theater here is, I think we lost 2 rows, I guess, on the last major renovation, and we went down to 2,500 plus or minus. But these are really intimate, and
it's astonishing.
Yeah, it's really astonishing.
So let's say 12,000 people in ancient Greece. That's a fair chunk of a regional population to have in one place, and that's just by design, right? There's a clear purpose for gathering this many people together, or set of purposes. Let's talk about that. What would these spaces have been used for? Well,
we know dramatical theater and entertainment was the formalized birth, I guess, of the Dionysus and in Athens.
Right.
But certainly they were also for citizen democracy and being able to exchange, and I guess for any important gathering, festive, you name it, public gatherings. It would be a place where you could get the whole town to listen if there was a message or I
think of things like trials, and as well as athletic events. They
had separate Odeons and council chambers, and they had other buildings for those purposes. It wasn't necessarily that city council met at the amphitheater.
Right.
They had their own. That was just some of these cities were very, very well developed. I mean, I think I've mentioned Prini before, and from a city planning perspective, it's fascinating because it's a grid. I mean, it's a north, south, east, west grid. It's really easy to navigate, and then this beautiful, intimate, built. Well, it's pretty much, there's a bit of carved, but a lot of it's sort of built. And I was mentioning that this is a fascinating one because there's all these diffusion blocks that the seating is sitting on. So you have slabs of stone sitting on these, sometimes carved or well-placed blocks that, they have 2 functions. They hold your bum up on a piece of stone, and they also do a lot of diffusion. And of course, the space underneath does some low-frequency cancellation. So it's beautiful. And then my gosh, I went back to that one as many times as I could. First on a scooter, and then again by motorcycle in the 2015. And I'm going back in a month. In a month I'll be in a small villa next to Prini, not far from Miltis too.
We have a motorcycle outside, even as we speak.
That's right.
So here's the deal for me. One of the things that I find absolutely astonishing in your passion for these places and the human intentions behind them is that they were, by the sound of it, out of your mouth, extraordinarily sophisticated places acoustically.
Definitely. And it was one of the, to be quite frank, I mean, it's a passion of, I'm very interested in world history, and I'm interested in the mechanics of the acoustics and I'm also interested in designing theaters. And since they're very few and far between, and I'd like to keep going and learning. You never stop learning, and of course the acoustic equation is much simpler when there's no roof. It's much simpler, but at the same time, the ideas of sight lines, intimacy, diffusion, reflection, focus, and creep, they're all very carefully articulated in the Greek theater. So it's a good place to start in terms of the research. And since Spyros Makouras is still alive, and he's a marvelous man who does installations and exhibitions. He inspired this trip from Stage for Dionysus. It was a traveling exhibition, and there was a map inside the program, and it had 700 theaters spewed across Europe, Africa, Asia,
like the Greek and Roman colonies.
Yeah, exactly. So I thought, oh my goodness, this is worth pursuing. And so the first exercise was to try and find out which, at least, from the first wave of research, which ones were historically important, or the more famous ones, and that's where I've started. But since that time, I've gotten off the beaten track a little bit, and that's helped a lot, because you just see more, and certain similarities, of course, and then with the Roman layers on top, it's quite rewarding and exciting when you can actually identify some of the Greek origins below. At least I find it exciting.
One of the most charming parts about the way you describe this is that this is a kind of detective story, right? You're actually putting together clues and insights about these spaces and how they would have been part of the lived experience of societies thousands of years ago.
Well, look, I mean, just to mention a couple of stories of one, or an example, in Miltos, I was measuring I would pace, and I brought two tapes, long and short, of course, to get the overall geometry and the specifics. But then I would measure the corrugations, and because often there would be in ruinous condition, I would measure in multiple places to try and come up with an average, or again, do the detective work you're trying to talk about to actually get the correct measurements.
Right. And let's be really specific for people who don't know what we're talking about. These are measurements of
the seating, where you would walk, and where your bum is on a perch, and then behind it is where you walk. So you walk behind the person, and that also is where the drainage, where it keeps your bum dry.
Right.
So those are drawn in, carved in stone, carved in stone and placed as blocks, and built up the hillside in various manners. But those have that provides your rise and run, so that gives you your sight lines, and also it has quite an impact on the acoustics, just the way they're put together. So when I refer to corrugations, I'm just talking about the seating.
Right.
So in measuring Miltos, I found that the lower corrugations, the first 5 rows, had a much deeper corrugation. And this was, I thought, well, I'm measuring it wrong, and I kept going back and doing it over and over till I got a picture of what was going on. And, you could say, oh, well, is this, they changed masons, or they changed quarries, or it was a period, the first they did that and something happened and they went back to it, or was it a deliberate design decision to increase the masking and low frequency at the first few rows so that the mids and the highs project further up? And as it turns out, well, that's my theory, and I'm sticking to it. And Didyma is this wonderful little town with the remains of the Temple of Apollo. It's so beautiful. We're talking a very, very large building, or ruins of it. And there's no theater in the town, but it's one of the places that I have gone to a couple of times, and I'm going back to again in a month. And so, not buying one of the carpets that this gentleman was trying to sell me, I walked by in the evening and saw this gentleman. He said, "Oh, no, Michael, come on over and have a drink." So I had this drink with Ergen, a tour guide, and I was talking about what my discoveries in Miltis were. So he said a couple of funny things. One of them was that in his experience, he believed that there was these plates that were placed on the seating rows, and just in the first, like just above the orchestra, and they would act as monitors. So I thought that was extraordinary. They don't. I mean, I'll go and see what I can find more evidence of that. But these plates would have been either fastened or attached to the seating in the first row. So if I'm singing or speaking to the group, I can hear myself because they're shooting the sound back at you, and they would be diffusing as well. So that was pretty interesting to have a tour guide of the area come up with that information. And he was, we ended up talking about guitars, so we had a lot to say. And then he mentioned he was the tour guide for Eric Clapton when Eric Clapton came through to, with his entourage at a certain point in the, I think it was in the 90s. And he told me that when they got off the bus at Dodymant to look at the Temple of Apollo, Clapton says, "Okay, 15 minutes. That's it. Then we're going." And of course, Ergen was a bit mouthy because he was already hired, forbidden to speak his name. But he said, "Why not 16?" And so
People like Ergen make the world go
I
round.
liked him, yeah. And I'll look him up. So that's it's just fantastic, and a stone's throw from Miltis is this Prini, and it's $2 to get in. There's nobody there, and the buildings are all there. They're just on the ground.
Right.
It's just a magnificent place, and it's transformed because where there was a river, a connection to the sea, it's just silt and it's farmland now.
Right.
So, but it's magical.
It certainly has a hold on you and your imagination and your.
Look, come on, a wonderful city plan, a compact city.
Yeah, right.
A place you'd like to live, right? There's some lessons in the
Totally.
yeah.
So this must have been one of the earliest grid cities because we think of towns growing organically, right, on hillsides or as ports or.
Right. No. Yeah. Good point. Because it was definitely an intended, grid. I mean, it was a city planning, a well-planned design.
And this is Didymont.
No, that's Prini.
This is Prini. Okay.
Yeah, Prini. It's north of Dodymant or whatever you want to call it. How you pronounce it.
So is Prini one of these places where there's sort of an upwelling of the spirit world along the lines of an oracle? Is it?
I don't know the legends or myth for many of the theaters in Turkey. I mean, obviously there's Delphi in mainland Greece, and then Dodona, which is another very important one in north of Delphi and a little bit northwest, where the oracles were absolutely important.
Right.
To people like Alexander and so on.
But
I don't know.
Very interesting.
I don't know about Prini. I'm going back to learn more.
Very cool. The Greek word polis, as in Acropolis, and I didn't know this because I just decided I'd look up the root word of politics because we live in such a politically, divided, supposedly anyway.
Well, it
polarized
is
time.
Becoming so.
And it turns out the root of the Greek word is actually, it has nothing to do with politics as we understand it, right? The people doing battle and opposing one another, but it has to do with the notion of citizenship, of actually belonging to a state to which you are going to contribute.
Okay, I did not know that.
Well, I didn't.
It equals hill to me, or mountaintop.
Right. I think that's the acro part.
Right.
So
okay.
What I'm getting at is that these spaces were at a time when Greece was perhaps, and I don't know what was going on in places like China and India at the same time, I'm ashamed to say, probably one of the few places on the earth where this notion of a public democracy existed, and in these spaces, right?
Well,
Is that true?
I can't claim to know all of the history. I was just drawn and seduced by the theatrical side of things.
Right.
But I think you're absolutely right in terms of democracy. I'm just trying to think of. I think it's Epidavros. When you just mentioned China,
Right.
and I'll mention Spiros's name again because the last time I spoke to him in Athens, it was Man and Nature Are One, 2018. I think it was the heading of his exhibition that he was going to work on, and he had gone to China, and they had. He exchanged stories with. Forgive me, I don't know who the person in China was, but they were sharing the similarities that was happening in terms of medicine. I think it was 3,000 years ago, and that there was a parallel universe. They were both. Really advanced in the medical sciences. That it was quite surprising, but they were,
Independent.
thousands of miles apart, and still reaching fantastic discoveries. Like I have not gone to Man and Nature Are One. It was supposed to be United Nations, and I haven't. I didn't know if it came to pass or not. But that's, I don't know if you're familiar with Epidavros.
No. Tell me.
The theater itself is one of the well-preserved ones. It's in two layers, like there's two tiers to it, and it receives, concerts, Elton John, Sting, whatever they play, and I'm not sure if there was some disrespect with the volume, and they may have stopped doing that for a while, but they still are very viable places for music, at least in our century. But Epidavros was, or Epidavros, will have to, depending where you're from, that was a center for medicine. So it was one of the, that's where that would be the hospital central for the country. They would go there to be healed of their various...
Like a sanatorium or a spa or that kind of thing.
Yes, all of the above.
Right.
And there happens to be a very, very large theater in really good condition there. And that actually, I think Epidavros is one that was used as a mathematical abstraction to prove, the mystery of why are these theaters sound so good? How could a person hear a pin drop from, 500 meters type thing, and that the abstraction in a in a mathematical abstraction, like taking the geometry and flattening it, and without people, but doing an acoustical analysis, and there was a paper put out in 2007 where the cancellation of the low frequency was proved in this abstract. So that's why I got so very excited about Miltis when I saw this other evidence of the, intentional deeper corrugations initially. So that seemed to tie pretty close to somebody doing this with intention. Trial and error is one thing, and learning along the way, but there's no doubt that this is, no accident. I mean, there would have been accidents along the way, but there was
clearly
profound knowledge.
Just by design.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your own work in theater here in Canada. You mentioned this earlier. We sort of danced away from it all too quickly. You've actually worked here in Stratford in the theaters
I think I told you one of the first jobs getting in the door with separating rehearsal hall 1 from the front of house from rear house, and doing some useful work at the time, and then listening to the technical staff that they were not used to architects sort of listening, and so I did well there for a little while, and they liked me, and I was able to get an extraordinary short study with John LeBurc Sr., doing the development plan for Michigan Opera Theatre, which was in a magnificent Howard Crane 1921 vaudeville house. And it was magnificent in that Howard Crane had taken, I guess what I would say, all the glory of Europe in terms of the volume and plaster and some of the technical things that are important to make a house have a reverb time, good sound, good reflections, and Americanized it, because he'd increased the population in this building to 3,300. So it gave a lot of room to claw it back a bit. And it was also a perfect location for the opera because it had land in front and behind. So you could, this tiny little, poor excuse for a vaudeville house, stage could be added to at the back in a big way. And then, of course, at the front, you could, expand the lobbies if needed.
Right.
But the important part is having stuff at the rear house where all the magic occurs. So that was a good project. And then, the next try was Capitol Theatre in Windsor, where I was the bridesmaid. Didn't get that one. And since that time, with a colleague of mine, Joseph Cook, we did design and we entered a number of international competitions: Oslo Opera House, Copenhagen, and Jyväskylä Concert Hall. None of which being, in the winner's circle. So, I'd done a few, helped other people, and I've done some recording spaces that are quite, well received. But so the theater, the passion for the research right now is my theater work. Right. It's just for the sake of learning at the moment.
It's so cool. So let's get back to motorcycles, because you've chosen to do this in a way that's, it's solitary. I think it's completely romantic, this idea of traveling alone and just marinating in this. How did you come to fall in love with the what's the power and the sort of solo thing of motorcycles? Is this just go back to childhood? Is this
when I was 12, I begged my mother for a mini bike, and when I was on my 13th birthday, I got a little Indian, the 3-horsepower Briggs & Stratton, where you put together and paint it yourself. And Mom thought, that'll get it out of his system. And a year later, I traded my drums for the Kawasaki 85, and with a trail sprocket on the back, and rode around in the winter as a 14-year-old, and got my license the day after I was 16, and motocross, raced, and there was a time in the 70s and 80s, like late 70s, early 80s, where you could buy a motorcycle every 2 years and not lose a penny.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know this.
It was, not lose a penny, but your commitment was extremely minor. Your financial commitment.
Right.
So it was a great time, because normally I would always buy a used motorcycle, and then there was a period where I was able to get a new one, and then ride it a couple of years, sell it, and get it, effectively trade in without a lot of damage. So I don't know, just touring Europe on a motorcycle is, I guess, a childhood dream. And now that you can fly and rent top quality gear in pretty much any of the major cities, it's a perfect arrangement. If you're living in Canada, okay, the roads are bumpy, the distances are great, and for the license season, which is brief,
right,
you've got an insurance investment looking after your investment for your motorcycle, or you can once a year or whenever you can fly to some exotic place and rent a motorcycle and have a great vacation for the same amount of money as your insurance for here. So
I like the sound of that.
it's a good deal. And then just the idea of one travels fastest alone, and if you've planned what you're doing, you can cover a lot of territory. I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen Around the World, or what's Ewing's.
No, I haven't.
Ewing McGregor.
Oh, Ewan McGregor. Yes.
Yeah, Charlie and Ewing.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Around the World in 80 Days.
Yeah.
On their Beamers, not KTM's.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's hard not to like or love.
So do you do your own maintenance? Do you get your hands dirty when you're doing it? Not that you do that.
I have.
In your
Yes. Yeah. It's not what I like to do. No,
Right.
I much prefer to ride.
Right.
There are guys that can fix them much better. I mean, I had to when I was a kid,
Right.
but at the moment, I prefer to let somebody else do that.
And go.
Yeah.
Go. So you were saying the roads are much better there. What?
Well, there's no frost
Right.
that damages. You know, there's not ba-bum, 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 and then there's ancient roads that are they're reasonably well maintained, and even if they're not, that's okay too, right? If you get the right gear and bike and you see what you're gonna face. So the terrain, the ocean side, the mountains, you've got beautiful twisty roads everywhere, and they're smooth. Like, it's paradise. You can really push it, and
Clearly.
yeah. And sometimes there's speeding traps, but in different countries, in France they warn you. There's a little warning before, and if you catch it, you're fine. If you don't, you get a ticket in the mail. Places like Thailand, the cops are in these groups. I've seen guys just blast through and keep going, and they don't chase, but. You still have to be respectful, and cautious, because you never know what's around the corner. The thing that's nice, in the places I've mentioned, save for Thailand, it's on the same side of it's not like the UK. It's on the right side,
right.
So it's very familiar. It's just like home, only more fun.
Right. This is an inference. I don't know if it's true. I got to know Montenegro really well when I was a journalist during the round robin of civil wars in former Yugoslavia. And almost all the roads in that country are former Roman roads, especially the ones in the hills and the mountains. And if you know Montenegro, it's like you took BC and just squished.
Oh.
It's spectacular. You can literally go from a ski area and play tennis on the beach in a matter of 20 or 30 minutes. It's extraordinary. That's not the point of the story. The point of the story is that they're Roman roads. Are these the roads that you're using, the sort of Roman and Greek?
Some of them would be. I can't pretend I know.
Right.
Although there's places that you can go. You have to walk at the end, but for instance, Termissus, just north of Antalya, it's in a forested park, but you take a road north and then get into the park and drive as far as you can, and then you walk, because it's perched high up on a mountain, and it's not Roman, but Alexander the Great could not. This is one of his failures, one of his very few. He did not conquer that city because it was so well sited, and the road, let's say, wasn't that easy to navigate.
Right.
So
probably by design.
Of course. That was the segue. I just thought of that as a journey on a path, and then, but it speaks to the importance of the siting of the buildings, and it's not restored, so you got to watch your step when you're navigating the ruins.
How does all of this relate in your heart and mind to your daily practice as an architect, or is this an independent quest, do you think?
Well, it's a bit like a vacation.
Of course.
To be quite honest, it's all connected because it's buildings, but some of the technologies that we have, and look, in this day and age, it's a struggle to get anything well anything that's not conventional, like anything that's designed or has some significant detail to it. There's challenges to get things built in our modern world, and obviously there was different challenges in those days. So it's a nice contrast to my modern profession or my day-to-day life, where the amount of energy it requires to get something extraordinary built, and then you go and you get to go and see how things were done 2,000 years ago, and how extraordinary they were then to survive as they do now.
Right.
And the engineering side of it it's certainly interesting, but I would just call it the moment a vacation from,
Right.
a contrast from, really.
It's quite moving to listen to you and see the respect you have for this work, which is millennia old.
Well, yeah, this whole idea of when all of this extraordinary work before this period, you had mentioned some of the Egyptian artifacts that exist, right, that, and even on this continent, or South America at least, the age, people are revisiting how old these things really are. And the workmanship is something that's it's hard not to be impressed. Again, a contrast, what you see that occurred then versus the difficulty of getting what you want done now. I have immense respect for the contractors and engineers and other people that I collaborate with who give a damn. And it's just fantastic, because you're friends for life when you meet these people and get to work with them. You just are. There's just a respect and a love for your colleagues that care. But it's not as prevalent as one would like. So it's really nice when you can find, well, you need a client as well. But
right,
when you find that client and you can call upon those engineers and some of those contractors, then it's a dance.